We're learning the first Sicha on Parshas Behaaloscha, in Chelek Chav Gimel, on page 62. This is a Sicha on a Rashi in this week's Parsha. As always, with the Rebbe Sichas on Rashi, this is a fresh and original understanding in this Rashi here. Looking at the Rashi at first glance, it seems to be a simply understood Rashi, and the Rebbe will give us a completely different and new and deeper understanding, with a few very powerful lessons that we could learn from this Rashi. The shir today is being learned to Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. Oifem Posik, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'shana hashenis l'tzeisa meretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon leimer. The Eibishter spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Yidden were in the Midbar. This is the second year after Yidden came out of Mitzrayim, and this is b'chodesh harishon, meaning in Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Wo der Eibishter hat angesagt der Fasiyas HaPesach, so in this Parsha, Hashem commands Yidden to bring the carbon Pesach, und behemshach lezeh the Parsha from Pesach Sheni. Then following the Yidden that complained that they couldn't participate, there is the mitzvah that you can also bring a Pesach Sheni. Stellt sich Rashi of the Werte b'chodesh harishon. So Rashi brings the words b'chodesh harishon on his mefarish and explains as follows. Parsha shebereish ha-sefer lo nemra ad iyeh. The Parsha that's in the beginning of the Sefer of Bamidbar wasn't said until Iyar. Over there it speaks about counting the Yidden, and that was in Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Amadata, you learn here, she'ein seide muktem u'mo'oche b'teira, that the story is written in the Teira, it's not written in the chronological order that it occurred. Things that happened earlier can be recorded in the Teira later, as right over here. Kedel Kaman Sif Gimel, we'll see the continuation of Rashi in Sif Gimel. So what we need to understand over here is, why is it at all necessary for Rashi to point out that it's written out of order? The concept that Teira is not written in order, we know this already from before. It's already learned from more than one, from a few psukim that's already earlier. Rashi, Zok Pirusha, and Rashi himself pointed this out earlier. Gleich in the erste Sedre, Bereishis, Beseifa, auf dem Posek, La Yodn Ruchi, Ba'adam Goyme, V'hoy Yom of Mei, Vesrim Shana. So towards the end of Parshas Bereishis, Rashi says this rule of Ein Mukdem U'Moche B'Teire, on Al Derech Zeh, Kama Pamam Lachri Zeh. A number of times after this, Rashi repeats it again. So why is it necessary here for Rashi to stop and point out the fact that this is a story that's written out of order? Nachme, the question is even further. Der Prat Kufa, looking over here within this story that happened now when Yidden were in the Midbar, dem Shini Asede from dem Parsha Shebereish Sefer, the fact that it's out of order from what was written in the beginning of the Sefer Bamidbar. It records the story of Chodesh Iyar, Veis Meshayim from Friya. We know this already from right here, what we learned just now before. Und in dem Seder was mat erst gelernt, right here in the same Parsha that we just learned. Karbonis Anasiyim, in the end of Parshas Nosai. So it brings all the karbanis that the Nesiim brought, versus Mefurish and Posik Zmanom, and in the Teira it says clearly the time when it was brought, Ve'ayihi b'yom kalis Moshe lohakim es hamishkan, that they brought these karbanis on the day that Moshe Rabbeinu concluded putting up the Mishkan. When was that? Was Rosh Chodesh Nisan haya, even though it doesn't say in the Pasuk clearly, but we know that that was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So from this already we see is Lomadata, we learn from here, therefore, as a muktem u'moche b'pratzeh, that the order over here is not the way it happened regarding this detail, regarding the counting of the beginning of the Chumash and the story that's recorded in Parshas Nosai that happened before that. So why does Rashi have to point this out over here regarding the Parsha of Pesach and Pesach Sheni if we know this already from before? Und Nachmed, in dem Dorten is Rashi gar nicht mefarish. Additionally, over there, when it comes up the first time that the Nesiim's Karbanis is out of order, Rashi doesn't point that out. It's obvious, it's understood. We know the rule that Teira is not written in a chronological order. Here, for some reason, Rashi stops and explains. Und wir finden es noch früher in demselben Sedre. The truth is, you can find this even earlier in the Parsha, and that's in Parshas Nosai, where it says, V'yishluchum en amachne, that it speaks there about those people that have to be sent out of various different camps when they're not pure. Is Rashi mefarish, and there Rashi says regarding that Parsha zu nemre b'yom shehukam hamishkan, v'das is gevem Rosh Chodesh Nisan kanal, that Parsha was said on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the day that the Mishkan was put up. So it's also recorded in the Torah out of order from the beginning, which happened in Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Is wie Rashi sagt, is wie sagt Rashi, so then how could Rashi say, Lomade Todah, that you learn over here only when you come to the Parsha of Pesach and Pesach Sheni, as the minion von ein Stede, Muktem und Moche B'Teire, lernt man erst up von dannen. That this idea that Teire is out of order and it writes things out of order, that is learned out only from here, from this Parsha of Pesach and Pesach Sheni. That's the basic and obvious question here on this Rashi. Why is Rashi pointing this out at all, if he doesn't in other places? And additionally, Rashi adds the word Lamadata. Only now could you learn this. So Sif Beis, the Rebbe explains this Inyan as follows. The Bir Bezeh, so the explanation here is as follows. The Chiddush da is, there is an additional Chiddush that you find here that is not in other places. Rashi uses the Lashon She'ein Seder Muktem U'Me'oche B'Teireh. You don't have the Seder, the order of what has to come first and what has to come later in the way it happened, in the way it's recorded in Torah. Rashi adds one word, Seder, that Rashi had never used this Lashon before. Was dem Lashon, hat Rashi nicht gesagt, in the Friedrich Erte. Whenever Rashi points out, Ein Muktem U'Me'oche, he never used this Lashon of Seder. What's the reason? The Erte, Friedrich, where Rashi sagt, Ein Muktem U'Me'oche B'Teireh, when Rashi writes this rule earlier, is das Benigeya, gewisse Parsche, Mu'ura, oder Adibu von Eibischen, versteht, Shaloim Mekayma. Rashi writes this regarding a certain occurrence, or regarding something, a certain parsha, or something that Eibushter said, which is written in the Torah, not in its right place. In the fallen is nit as akashir dem shini seder, but in those cases it's not such a big question that it's written out of order. Val Torah is nit a sefer divrei yomim, because Torah is not a history book. Was erzählt Seder am Reis und das Mann, wenn jede Zivi ist gesagt geworden. That's coming to let you know exactly, chronologically, what happened and when the events took place. That's not what Torah is about. Torah is a Torah, Hayros, mitzvahs, and so on. So Rashi, in the Alle Erte, whereas Mefarish, Ein Muktem U'Moche B'Torah, whenever Rashi does have to clarify that it's out of order, why is Rashi clarifying it if we know this, that Torah is not a history book? Komplois Bavarenen, as Mezonatopen came Toes, in Zman HaMorah, in Zman HaTzivi. Rashi wants to clarify that you should not make a mistake based on where it's recorded in Torah, that it may seem to you that it happened in the order that it appears in the pasuk. And if it's relevant to understand and know the order of how things happened, whether for the pasuk there or in another place, so Rashi will clarify you so you shouldn't make a mistake that it happened the way it appears in the Torah. So, but Rashi is not coming to again and again let you know, oh, by the way, the Torah is not written in order. It's understood. Torah is not a history book. So now Pizeh is moving for was Rashi Zoknet Frias, so going back to the examples that Rebbe brought from Parshas Nasa, it's understood why there Rashi doesn't point out that it's written out of order. When the Nisim bring their karbonis on the day that Moshe put up the Mishkan, other by Vishalchum and Amachne, that the parasha which speaks about the people impure being sent out. As Rashi, it's not necessary for Rashi to clarify that it's written out of order. While the Mokemacher is Rashi mefarish dermit when the parasha is gesagt geworden. Because Rashi already explains elsewhere when these parashas were said, so it's understood. There's no mistake about this, that here it's being written out of order. Und da steht es befehlish, b'yayim kalais Moshe. It says clearly that it was the day that Moshe put up the Mishkan, which happened, the Shchedish Nissen. Und bei Parsha Vishalchum and Amachne is Rashi mefarish, Parsha zu nemra, b'yayim shehukam ha-Mishkan. So Rashi clarifies that it was said on the day that the Mishkan was put up, Kanal is quoted. So it's understood that that's not in the order that it appears in the pasuk. So Rashi doesn't have to clarify any further, Ein Muktem U'Moche B'Teireh. Come back over here to our parsha, the parsha of Pesach and Pesach Sheni. Beniden die dann aber sieht man, as the pasuk kommt madgish sein, dem Seder Uzman von die Zivuyim Umurais. Here the Torah gives dates, and the Torah is emphasizing that the date and the timing of when it happened is significant. And that's both Sai b'Parsha Seinu, both over here in this parsha of Pesach. Vayidaba vayal Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'shona shenis. Let's say some at Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon leimer, that it was on the chodesh Nisan of the year, the second year after they came out of Mitzrayim. And Sai b'rosh hasefer vayidaba Hashem Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'yom moed be'echad l'chodesh hasheni b'shona shenis. Let's say some at Mitzrayim leimer, that it was on a chodesh year. So the pasuk is not just telling you what happened, but the Torah specifically wants you to know and understand the dates of when it happened. Und Hafapikain stehen die Parshiyas eine benegei der zweite behepach haseder. Nevertheless, these Parshiyas here are written out of order. That's what's unique over here that you don't find anywhere else. Is Rashi mefarish, so therefore Rashi says, Lamadito, dolenet menareis hachidish. Here we learn an additional novelty in the way things are recorded in Torah, as ein seder muktem u'ma'ocha b'Torah. That even when the Torah is telling you the seder, emphasizing the order of how it happened, still it's not recorded in the Torah the way it actually happened. Oich when the Torah is madgish dem zman von den Yonim v'tzivuyim, was wie tois will Torah, der mit der Zählen dem seder von den Tzivuyim u'murais. So the fact that the Torah is emphasizing when it happened means that there is a point to know exactly when it did occur. Can euch dan sein as ein seder muktem u'mocha b'Torah. That while there is a seder here, Torah itself tells you the seder, but yet the place where it's recorded in the Torah is still not in the order of the way it actually happened. That's the unique chiddush that Rashi is pointing out right over here that we never had before. Okay, so that's the explanation for the first part of Rashi, why Rashi is explaining this. Now here, the Rebbe continues in Sif Gimel, the Rashi now comes and explains why did the Torah write this out of order. Weiters Rashi mamshich, so Rashi continues, why did Chumash Bamidbar not begin with this parasha that happened earlier? Because there's a story here that's the embarrassment of Yidden. All 40 years that Yidden spent in the Midbar, they only brought one korban Pesach, which is an embarrassing thing for Yidden. So therefore it's not brought in the beginning. The Torah does not want to begin a Chumash with an embarrassing story. That's the reason Rashi gives. Okay, so before the Rebbe addresses the pshat of this reason, but we first need to understand why Rashi has to give this reason altogether. Bashkaf Rishayna is not move on. So at first glance, what Rashi is saying here is not understood. Since, as Rashi says, the Torah is teaching us, we know that there's no order in the way things are recorded in Torah. So so then why does Rashi now ask, so why did the Torah not open the Chumash with this story? Doch erst gesagt, das ist der Fall, weil ein Seder muktem u'mocha b'Torah, that there is no order in Torah, including here when the Torah spells out the date clearly. Nevertheless, things are not recorded in Torah with a Seder. So why is Rashi then continuing to give a reason why the Torah writes it out of order? Doesn't demand any reason at all. Wie wir sehen, der Makke von Pirish Rashi saying Gemara, the source of this Rashi in Gemara, as nachdem wie die Gemara vier Tois, Zeise Meres, ein muktem u'mocha b'Torah. That right here we see that the Torah is not written in order. Is the Gemara net mevayed dem tam for was the Torah hyped net mit dem parsha? The Gemara does not carry on to explain. So why is it written out of order? On the Sifri, the same as Sifri, it doesn't explain this because it doesn't demand any explanation. So why does Rashi go on to explain Vilama? That why don't we open the Chumash with this story? So the Pashto is what we can't answer. So simply the answer to this is, as Rashi is medayik b'lashaynai, if you look closely into the words that Rashi chooses, so Rashi says, Lamadata, you learn. You learn that there's no order in Torah. Nit vi in Sifri, unlike the word that it says in Sifri, lilametcha. This here comes to teach you. So what's the difference? Das heißt, as Leut in Sifri hat die Torah mishane gewend dem Seder. The Torah here is specifically writing the dates. And it's changing the order in the way it's recorded of the way it happened. Kedei uns zu lernen, lilametcha, as they say the muktem mocha b'Torah. This exactly is the purpose. The Torah wants you over here to learn from this that there's no order of the way things are recorded in the Torah. So if that's the case, there's no additional explanation demanded why it's out of order, because that's exactly the point. The Torah is writing the dates and then writing it out of order to learn this idea. Came later Rashi. On the other hand, Rashi just says lamadata. What does lamadata means? You learn. You know now. Meintas, what that means is nit as tzilib dem hat die Torah mishane gewendem seder. This is not the reason why the Torah wrote it out of order. No, as from them learning mirarais. It's just that here we learn the fact as ein seder muktem u'mocha b'Torah. That Torah is written out of order, but that's not the purpose of why the Torah changed the order. Is the Rebbe, so therefore verti shaila v'lama lepasach bezu. So therefore, it can be justified why Rashi continues and asks why the Torah doesn't open with this story if that's the right order. Why? Even though this is the rule, Torah writes things out of order. Valvi bavos, because it's known, and the Rebbe brings in the other sources for this, as dort hu mezakt ein muktem u'mocha b'Torah, in the places where you see Torah writes things out of order, True, the Torah writes it out of order because it's not a history book, but there's of course a reason for this. There is a reason and a purpose of why the Torah is writing it out of order. It's not just because it's not a history book, so it just writes things randomly. No, because it's not a history book. Rather, it's a book to teach us halachas or ideas in a certain order. So therefore, if it demands to be taught in a certain way, it'll be written out of order. So therefore, there is a reason required to explain, like what is the reason why it has to be written out of order. That's why Rashi goes on to give the reason. Even though this is the pshat in Rashi, but there's still something not smoothly understood over here when you look into the actual words, the way Rashi phrases his question. He says the shaila, because based on this, what should be the question of Rashi? Nit lama loy pasach bezu. The question of Rashi should not be why did the Torah not open with this story? No, rather, favas the Torah hat aleph mishana seder gewen. The real question over here is why is the Torah changing the order? It's not. There is no specific reason why Chumash Bamidbar has to open with this story. It's just the fact that chronologically that's where it belongs, and we want to understand why we changed the order. That should have been the wording of Rashi's question. And Beis hat makting gewen yene parsha. The question really becomes, why is the story in the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar about counting the Yidden? Why does that come first? That's really the question. Hat Rashi gedacht fragen, so the emphasis in the words, the phrasing of the question here should be, nit lomaloi pasach bezu. Not, why aren't we opening with this story, which makes it sound like that there's something unique about this story that demands that it should be opened with this story. No, rather, the question of Rashi should be, lama shina haseder. Why is the Torah changing the order? V'lama pasach beparsha shebereish hasefer. And why are we opening with the story that it opens with, the story of counting in the beginning of the sefer? V'chayetze b'zeh, some similar lashon. So we see here, in the way Rashi phrases the question, that there's something that's bothering Rashi about the very fact that the Chumash Bamidbar does not begin with this story. Also, another thing that has to be explained in the word that Rashi chooses here, the lashon from Rashi's kashya. So the language Rashi uses here is v'lama loy pasach. Why does the Torah not open with this story? Unit lama loy hiktim. And Rashi does not use the expression that he uses in other places. Why did the Torah not put this first in the order that it happened? Or something similar. What's the emphasis of Pasach? That we should open Chumash Bamidbar with this story. Okay, so in order to explain this, what's bothering Rashi here, so we have to now look into the actual reason Rashi gives into why the Torah didn't begin with the story. So here in Sif Daled, we will analyze what is the reason. So what's the answer that Rashi, taken from the Medrash and other places, what's the answer here? Why the Torah doesn't begin with this story? Because there's an embarrassment of Yidden here. For 40 years, Yidden only brought one carbon Pesach. So the question is, in was besteht dort Gnus? What does the embarrassment consist of? Rashi hat frie schon mefarish gewen. Rashi already explained earlier in Parshas Boy. As tola kosev mitzvah zu korban pesach b'biyasam la'aretz. That the Torah says that this mitzvah is dependent on Yidden being and arriving in Teretz Yisrael. V'lo nischayvu b'midbar ela pesach echad she'asu b'shana shenis al pi adibur. Only one time did the Yidden bring the carbon in the midbar, and that was a unique exception that the Eibishter told them that they should bring the carbon. This heißt, they sind befeidish. They're clearly only commanded to bring the carbon when they arrive in Teretz Yisrael. So what is the embarrassment of the fact that they didn't fulfill or bring the carbon Pesach in the midbar if they did not have the mitzvah yet at that point? Or b'meila is a kravas ha-Pesach in midbar. Achutz the erster mal is given also. It would actually be prohibited to bring the carbon Pesach any other time in the midbar. You can't bring a carbon of the Mizbeach, something that was not commanded. So why is there any embarrassment about the fact that Eden did not bring this carbon? On the contrary, is given blazal pia dibra. This was an exception. This one time they brought the carbon is because Hashem commanded they should do so. So this is a question that all the Mefarshim ask on this reason that it says here, that it's an embarrassment of Eden. So Tosfos Mefarshei Rashi Zene Masber. So Tosfos and the commentaries here on Rashi explain that the embarrassment here is as follows: the Hainu gnusan shenishtal likonis la'aretz ad mem shana mipnei oven hameraglim. The embarrassment is the very fact that they remained this long in the midbar, 40 years, and that was because of the Aveda that happened later on with the Meraglim that kept them back in the midbar for all these years, and as a result, they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach until they arrived to Eretz Yisrael. That's the embarrassment of this parasha here, that only one korban they brought when they were in the midbar. But it's very difficult to accept this pshat in the simple understanding of the pasuk according to Rashi. Warum? Because Aleph, number one, in unser Parsha from Pesach, wird nicht der Mond as Zalib of Nameraglim, wird man nicht rein in Eretz Yisrael. In this Parsha here, that's being delayed and not written in the beginning because it's embarrassing, it doesn't mention one word about the fact that Yidden sinned and therefore they will not enter into Eretz Yisrael. V'adarab, on the contrary, weiter beParsha Seinu. If you continue reading the psukim here in Parshas Behaaloscha, steht, the pasuk says, as Moshe had gesagt, Neisem anachnu alamakim. We're ready, we're traveling into Eretz Yisrael. Pirish Rashi says, Miyad ad gimel yomim anu nechnasim la'aretz. The plan was that in 3 days we will enter into Eretz Yisrael. This first journey they traveled away from Midbar Sinai was the journey that they were going to go straight into Eretz Yisrael. So over here in this parsha, you read the story, and even the continuation of the story in the next parsha here, there's nothing embarrassing about the Eden that is recorded here. So yeah, it could be later on in the Parsha of Meraglim. There the embarrassing story comes out about the Aveda that happened. But this is not embarrassing at all. Beis ve'ikir. Another question, and this is the main question here. If this is the problem, that it's embarrassing that Yidden stayed in the Midbar for 40 years, is one, the first thing that we should ask here is, the Gnus isn't them was nishtal the kanis la'aretz ad mem shana. So then the embarrassing point here is the fact that they remained in the Midbar for this long. Nit the akrava from Pesach, but not the akrava, the fact that they did bring this Pesach here. And two, another point there is, if this is considered to be as something embarrassing, is das shaykh nit blois to Korban Pesach. This has nothing to do specifically with the Korban Pesach. Not so alle mitzvahs. There are many mitzvahs that you could only fulfill when you enter into Eretz Yisrael. Passt doch mit miyache sein die Genos zu Korban Pesach dafke. So why are we attributing this embarrassment of Yidden to the Korban Pesach that was only brought once in the Midbar when the Yidden couldn't fulfill all the mitzvahs, Hatluyas Baretz, Shmitte, Trumme, Meiser, and all the other mitzvahs that only applies in Eretz Yisrael? V'adarabe, mer Genos is in the alle andere mitzvahs from dem Sog, weil sie aber nicht mekayim gwen beim Midbar für loi paar machas. There's a greater embarrassment regarding other mitzvahs that could only be fulfilled in Eretz Yisrael because they weren't fulfilled in the Midbar not even once. So how is this parsha here of Korban Pesach expressing any embarrassment of the Yidden at all? Or uniquely Korban Pesach different than any of the other mitzvahs? So it's very difficult to understand the answer of Rashi that this parsha of Korban Pesach and Pesach Sheni is an embarrassment of Yidden. So here the Rebbe will introduce and give us a completely new and original understanding in Sifhei what this answer of Rashi is. That man das verstehen behagtem, was Rashi sagt. As like Pasach bezum mipnei shignusen shel Yisrael. So Rashi is telling us that the Torah doesn't open with this story because it's the embarrassment of Yidden. Isn't it glatik? So there's something over here that's not smooth about this answer Rashi gives. If in fact Torah does not want to tell you the story of the embarrassment of Yidden in the beginning of the Sefer, so why is the Torah at all recording this story which has an embarrassing point about Yidden? Is the fun move on? So from this itself it's understood as the ikke kepede debai is benigeya the parsha sheberoisha sefer, that the main thing that the Torah is particular about is not to open the chumash with this embarrassing story. Because the opening of a chumash has to be with something that expresses the love for Yidden. How do we know this? Why is this a rule that we say that you always have to open with the love for Yidden? Und wenn wir gefunden haben in der Psyche von jedem Sefer von die Gimel Svarim Shebeteire in Balachas Retzach wegen Yidden. As we see regarding other 3 Svarim that begin with a story that speaks about Yidden, and it talks about a story with Yidden that expresses the love of Yidden. Shmeis Vayikra und Bamidbar. The 3 Chumashim of Shmeis Vayikra and Bamidbar is metaninyan shel chibah for Yidden. Speaks about something that expresses the love for Yidden. Rashi is mefarish in the Aschala from Yidden Sefer, as Rashi himself explains at the beginning of each one of these Svarim. Ve'ele Shmai, says Rashi, Leidiach Hibasan. The names are being counted again of the Shvatim that came down to Mitzrayim. This is to express the love. Vayikra Moshe, so Rashi says, what does this mean that Hashem calls to Moshe before he speaks to him? Before Hashem speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu, he calls him, he's inviting him with love. Also, expressing the love for Yidden. And then Vayidaber Bamidbar Sinai, the story in the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar that says that about Yidden being counted, Mitoich Chibasan Lefanav Mainaisim Kol Shah. Here as well, it opens with a story expressing the love that Hashem has for Yidden. And the Rebbe adds also, we can say, Val Derech Zeh B'Sefer Bereishis, was read V'reng Brias Kol Olam Kuloi. Sefer Bereishis, even though it speaks about creation of the entire world, Zog gleich Rashi, Matam Pasach Bereishis. Why does the Torah begin with the story of Bereishis and not with the Chodesh Zelachem? As the Kavanah Dafum V'Shal HaPsiche is, Koyach Maisav Higid La'amai Losses Lahem Nachlas Goyim. Torah opens with this story to tell you that the entire world is created by the Eibusher and therefore the land Eretz Yisrael belongs to Yidden. So again, the Torah begins with something that is focusing on a gift that the Eibusher gives Yidden. So that's what we see, the way the Torah opens up all the Chumashim, Bereishis, Shmais, Vayikra, Bamidbar. So since this idea of the way the Chumash in the Sefer Torah has to open up, we already know this from the other Svarim before, for sure from Shmais and Vayikra. So Muslim Zagen, if so, we must say, as the Shaila from Rashi da, that when Rashi says that there's a Shaila here, V'lama le'pasach bezu. So why does the Torah not open with this story of Pesach and Pesach Sheni? Right, so again, this is really based here on the diuk that the Rebbe said earlier in the Sikha. Rashi does not simply say, why was the Torah Mishana the Seder? Or why did the Torah open with the story of counting, which is something that happened later? But Rashi emphasizes, his question is, V'lama loy pasach bezu. Why aren't we opening with this story? Now, this question must be based on the premise that we have that the Torah opens up with a story expressing the love of Yidden. So if Rashi could phrase the question this way, so what is this question? Is this story about Pesach and Pesach Sheni actually expresses the love for Yidden. And therefore Rashi is asking, based on the rule that we know that the Torah begins with the love of Yidden, why don't we open with this story that perfectly and uniquely expresses the love for Yidden? That's the question of Rashi over here. So Rashi is not just asking this question because there's a rule that yes, Torah changes the order, but there has to be a reason and a purpose for it. But Rashi is basing this on the rule that we have that the Chumash begins with the subject of love for Yidden, and this parsha here that actually happened before would actually be the perfect thing to begin with to express the love for Yidden. What's the explanation for this? Sivav, the Rebbe says, to explain this, Chumash Vayikra is Rubeke Kulei Tzivuim from the Meibishten, was dann gesagt geworden zu Moshe la'achar hakomas hamishkan. So Chumash Vayikra is, for the most part, the mitzvahs that the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu after the Mishkan was put up. Chumash Bamidbar, and then when you continue into Chumash Bamidbar, red wegen die Tzivuyim, on dem Seder HaMerois, and on Haggis B'nai Yisrael Bamidbar. It speaks about the certain Tzivuyim as well, but also in different occurrences that happened to the Yidden, how they wore, how they behaved in the Midbar, how they fulfilled mitzvahs, and what they did while they were in the Midbar. If so, what memele given masin. If so, it would be very fitting as die Psyche von Sefer Bamidbar soll sein mit der Meile von Yidden, wie sie haben bekannt given bepeilt Zivi Hashem. It should open with a story that what did Yidden do? How did they spend their time in the Yidden? What was their hanhoge? That they fulfilled the mitzvah of Hashem in the Midbar. Vayasu es hapasach goyme kechol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe kein asa b'nei Yisrael b'shlei Musa ub'miluah, that Yidden brought the carbon Pesach 100% as the Eibishter commanded. As alle Yidden of Makri gewend dem carbon Hashem b'moyedai in Mishkan, they all brought it in the right time. Wie es darf zu sein. Und ad kedei atvia lo menigara. Not only this, even those that couldn't bring demanded that they want to join as well, and they also brought the carbon Pesach. So this is a beautiful story expressing of how Yidden are fulfilling Hashem's mitzvah in the Midbar to open Chumash Bamidbar with it. Half a piece, and now you may ask, well, what's the advantage of the expression of love of the Yidden here that's more than the expression of love that there is in the actual story of the counting that the Chumash begins with? Is an so that story of the counting is also something that expresses the love of the Yidden Kanal. Is aber, however, there's still an advantage in the expression of love that there is in this story. Because Neisef Lezeh, in addition to the obvious fact, was wie bald as unser Parsha kommt frier bis man, that the story of this Parsha of bringing the Korban Pesach happened before, wollt mehr masken wenn zu sagen, die Parsha mit ihrer Chavivus. So it's more fitting to just keep it in order and say this story, which expresses the love of the Eibishter for Yidden, or the love of the Yidden for the Eibishter, and the fact that they fulfill the mitzvah. But besides that, is the chibah was mitoichi basam mein oisam nit kein dava chadash. There's another advantage here, because the story of the counting of the Yidden, which the Chumash begins with, that expresses their love, that's not a novelty. We know this already from before. As Vertschen gebracht bereish Sefer Shmais. It's the same idea that Sefer Shmais opens with the counting of the Shvatim that came down to Mitzrayim, which is an expression of love. If so, it would be more fitting to begin with a new and different expression of love that you didn't have for Hashem by fulfilling the mitzvah, not a repetition of the same expression of love that was already recorded before. And we could add even more to this, that if the Chumash demoled would gewend the Psiches Beseder from Meilam B'Kodesh, if Chumash Bamidbar would open with this story of the Yidden bringing the Korban Pesach, then the expression of the love of Yidden from Shmais to Vayikra to Bamidbar would be an expression of love going higher and higher. Zula Meilam Mizu. Psiches Sefer Shmais is the chibah von Yidden mitzad atzmam. This expresses the love that Yidden have for who they are, their very existence. Was drikt zechais and then was manan, and therefore they wish to count Yidden. That's the first level of love. The psiche von Sefer Vayikra is the chibah von Eibischen zu Yidden in Inyan Atzilvim va mitzvahs. Here we're taking it to the next level. The expression of the love of Hashem for Yidden regarding how Hashem commands them, how Hashem gives them a mitzvah. Was drikt zechais and then was far alle tzivuyim is given kodma kriya lashon chiba. Before Hashem commands and He speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem summons him and invites him with love. And this is actually an expression of love to all Yidden, not just to Moshe, as the Rebbe explains here. Ukediyak lashon Rashi l'chol dibreis or l'chol amireis or l'chol tzivuyim. Anytime Hashem speaks and commands, so Hashem calls with love. And this is nitals dem dibu to Moshe mitzadatzma. This is not an expression of love that's related specifically to Moshe Rabbeinu himself. As Rashi himself contrasts this, the prophets of other nations, Hashem speaks to them, but in a temporary manner, in an impure manner. Since they are prophets of other nations. So meaning the Maila of Moshe Rabbeinu here is the fact that he represents and is part of Klal Yisrael. So this is an expression of the way Hashem commands a mitzvah to Yidden. That's the second level of love. Und die Psyche von dem Sefer Shalachri is Sefer Bamidbar. And if now Sefer Bamidbar would open with the story of the Korban Pesach, would dann gewähren mit dem Meile v'chibur von Yidden. So here the expression of the love of Yidden would be, and then was der Eibishter hat sich dann angesagt, achrei hakomes ha-Mishkan at mitzvah muyechedes, that the Eibishter decided to give Yidden, after the Mishkan was put up, a unique mitzvah, was mitzad atzma, seine sie damals in Midbar nicht gewähren mechuyev. In that time period, Yidden were not obligated. This was really supposed to be only later when they come into Eretz Yisrael. Was das allein Weisstern of Schwachen v'chibasen shel Yisrael. So this itself, that the Eibishter decides to make an exception and give them the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah that was really supposed to be only later on, is a deeper expression of love. In this story, we additionally see the Yidden haben mekayim gewend the mitzvah. We also see the love of Yidden that they fulfilled the mitzvah. Makri gewend dem Korban in Mishkan b'shleimus k'chol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe kein asa b'nei Yisrael kanal. So this would be taking the level of love to yet a higher level. So why not open Chumash Bamidbar with this story of Korban Pesach? Furthermore, there's a big advantage with opening in this story. Because over here the love is expressed Aleph, the Meile und Schwach von Yidden. This expresses the level and the praiseworthiness of the Yidden. Wie stark sie haben gewollt mekayim sein Tzivei Hashem. We see here in this story to what extent they wanted to fulfill a mitzvah. People that were impure and they couldn't bring the carbon. They demanded and they argued, why should we be left out? That expresses the intense love that you didn't have for a mitzvah. B is another point, the Chibbe von Yidden beim Eibishten. It also expresses how beloved Yidden are by Hashem. As it had angenommen sei Tainu Bakasha Lo Menigara, Hashem accepted their argument and their request that they should not be left out. Und gegeben sei die Gelegenheit zum Maschlum sein der Chesoren und Makim sein dem Pesach Sheni. And he gave them the opportunity to fulfill what they were missing and to bring the Pesach Sheni. So this parsha here of Pesach, including Pesach Sheni, is a very powerful story expressing the love of the Eibishter for Yidden, the love of the Yidden for the Eibishter in a very unusual and powerful way. So why would the Chumash not begin with this story? That's really the question of Rashi, the way Rashi phrases it. V'lama loi pasach bezu. Why don't we begin the Chumash with this story? So here now in Siv Zayin, we see the answer that Rashi gives. Avdem enfit Rashi. So here Rashi answers and says, Mipnei shehignusan shal Yisrael shekol mem shana shal Yisrael b'midbar lo yikrivu el Pesach zel b'vad. There's an embarrassing point here regarding Yidden that they only brought one carbon Pesach for all 40 years that they wore in the Midbar. What does Rashi mean to say? As di chavivas, was mezet in their parsha. Yes, there is a tremendous level of love of Hashem for Yidden that we do see over here in this parsha. That tzivui of Akravas HaPesach b'midbar, Hashem commanding Yidden to bring this Pesach here, B'tur Eirah Shah, which is an exception in those 40 years, und Pesach Sheni, the story of Pesach Sheni, which is also a very powerful story. However, there is also a point of embarrassment that comes out of this story itself. How is that? So here the Rebbe comes back to answer the question, what's embarrassing about not bringing the Karban Pesach for 40 years if they didn't have the mitzvah in this time period? So the first thing that Rebbe introduces is as follows. Even though Rashi already said that the Torah says that the fulfillment of this mitzvah is dependent on being in Eretz Yisrael. Es ist aber nicht wie andere mitzvahs, was in Entale Bibil Aretz. You can't compare it to other mitzvahs that also could only be fulfilled when you come into Eretz Yisrael. The very obligation is only possible once you are in Eretz Yisrael. The mitzvahs wie Bikurim, Trumas, Meisters, or Afila Chala, all these mitzvahs like Bikurim and Trumas and Meisters, or even Chala, which are related to the produce and the things that grow in the land, only in Eretz Yisrael. Die mitzvahs sind verbunden mit Guf haaretz. This mitzvah is connected to the physical land. Die Peres and Tfuas v'Yidin in Eretz Yisrael davka. It's only produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael. So it's not some technical reason or some decision that the Eibusha says, let's delay the mitzvah until you come into Eretz Yisrael. The mitzvah originally is for the land. There's other mitzvahs, like Petach HaMor, when you have to redeem the donkey. It's obviously not related to the physical land. But still, according to one opinion in Rashi, is verbunden mit biyasan la'aretz dafke, that the fulfillment of this mitzvah is only when they come into Eretz Yisrael. Is der chiyuv not biyasan la'aretz? So that's a mitzvah. Its entire obligation is only possible and only begins when they come into Eretz Yisrael. Akrov is carbon Pesach. However, when it comes to bringing the carbon Pesach, is shayach by midbar. It's possible to bring it in Midbar, and it's in essence a mitzvah which is sort of relates to this time period over here. It says, but the actual obligation, the Eibishter delays until they actually arrive in Eretz Yisrael. But the concept of the mitzvah, the fact that they're bringing a carbon Pesach because of Yitzias Mitzrayim, in essence, is relatable to this time period as well. So that's one point. Okay, now an additional point you see over here, in them parsha, we see over here in this parsha of Pesach and Pesach Sheni, as mitzad der bakoshe v'taynu von etliche gezählt to Yidden, lo menigara, when there was a request and an argument of just very few that were tamei, and they said, why should we be left out? Hat der Eibishter gegeben als Mann von Korban Pesach bei Yudalet Be'ir, when sie sollen keine Makriv sein, den Korban Pesach, the Eibishter gave them a time when they can bring the Korban Pesach in Yudalet Be'ir. Azach, was man gefunden hat bei kein ander mitzvah or carbon. We don't find such a concept by any other mitzvah or carbon that if you lose an opportunity, that you have a time to make it up. Was man sagt, das Bechlal, avayeme bottle carbone. When it comes to other carbonis, if you missed its time, so then the opportunity is missed and you can't ever make it up again. But over here by Pesach Sheni, we clearly see that the Eibusha gives them an opportunity to make it up. So this is an obvious question that even a child will come and ask. Wie kommt es? How could it be As die alle Lametes Shana, was Jiden sind gewähnt in Midbar, 39 years, the Jiden are in the Midbar, haben sie nicht gefordert und gebeten von Eibischen Lama Nigara. Why did Yidden not demand from the Eibishter that why should we be left out? As they will makiv and then carbon Lashem, then carbon Pesach. That they also want to have an opportunity to bring the carbon and not wait until they come into Eretz Yisrael. Und befragt, dass das ist gewähnt dem Carbon, was hat sie geraten wird in Mitzrayim und gebracht zu der Gula von Mitzrayim. This is a carbon which is commemorating their leaving of Mitzrayim and bringing them to the redemption. So for sure they should have a special feeling to demand throughout 39 years to bring this carbon. Yidden should understand that they have to demand this with the following logic. If, when there was just a handful of individuals that demanded that we shouldn't be left out, so the Eibusha gives them the opportunity to bring the carbon. Most definitely, when all the Yidden would demand this, wissnig as their carbon is nit gleich zu shar mitzvahs atluyis ba'aretz. If they know what was explained before, that this is not a mitzvah which is impossible and not related at all to this time period, kanal, but it is possible that it could be brought now as well. So wollten gebeten und gemahnt beim Eibischen, als sie willen makir seine Carbon Pesach, bedugme, wie sie haben das getan, bei Midbar, bei Shana Hashenis, wollten sie das ausgeführt. If they would have demanded that they want to bring the carbon Pesach just like this one time that David allowed them to bring the carbon, they definitely would have succeeded, and Hashem would have commanded and allowed them to bring the carbon Pesach here in the Midbar. And das is Genusan Shel Yisrael. So therefore, this parsha expresses something negative, something embarrassing about Yidden. Shekol arboim shana shel Yisrael b'Midbar lo yikrivu el Pesach ze bilvad. That this is the only time they brought the carbon Pesach. Wenn Yidden beten beim Eibishten, Lama Nigara, wollten sie gepeilt und makriv gewähnt dem carbon, kol arboim shana. Yidden would have succeeded and they would have brought this carbon for 40 years. So the fact that this was the only time they brought the carbon expresses the fact that the Yidden did not demand, that the Yidden did not have that desire to want to bring the carbon. That's the negative point that comes out in the story. So even though the story overall expresses a tremendous love of the Eibishter for Yidden and the Yidden for the Eibishter, as the Rebbe pointed out before, but nevertheless there's an element of negativity here about Yidden, so therefore the Chumash Bamidbar does not begin with the story. So here the Rebbe continues in Sivches, let's not forget, amongst the Yidden here in the Midbar, you have Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen. What happened? Where were they? The question though now becomes, Wie kommt es, as Moshe, Aaron, Chayetze bezeh, or anyone similar on their level, hat nicht gebeten und nicht gepeilt beim Eibishten, als soll makriv sein, der Carbon Pesach, dem ganzen Meshach Malametes Shana B'Midbar. Nobody amongst Klal Yisrael, even the greatest, Moshe and Aaron did not demand that the carbon should be brought anytime in these 39 years. Why didn't they? Is there beer bezeh? So the explanation here is as follows. B'pnimi yisan yanim. To look at this from a different perspective, understanding who Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen are, so we can understand why they did not want to be an exception and demand this when Yidden are not. Nisiya Yisrael is l'chol l'roish v'chol inyanam trachten und tan wegen Yidden. What's a nasi? What's a leader amongst Yidden? His whole entire focus is just one thing, to think about what he can do for the sake of Yidden. We find by Moshe Rabbeinu himself, as sich Moshe nefesh gewesen for Klal Yisrael, that he was ready to give up his life for Yidden, nit nur mesiris haguf, nor euch mesiris hanefesh. He was ready to give up not just his life physically, but even his entire neshama, his ruchnisdige life. He was ready to be erased from the entire Torah. That's a true nasi, that's a true leader of Yidden. So therefore from this we understand over here regarding what we're speaking about, demanding that the Yidden should have an opportunity to bring the carbon Pesach in the Midbar. Genusan shel Yisrael, wie das kommt heraus bei Parsha Seina. This embarrassing point over here that we could see in this Parsha, that Yidden did not demand that the carbon should be brought throughout the other 39 years, is nit if azefil bat gosha. It's not highlighted to such an extent. Warum? We do not find that you can request of Hashem to have the mitzvah of carbon Pesach in a time period when the mitzvah does not apply yet. What we do find is Pesach Sheni, which is to make up those that missed the carbon that everybody was obligated to bring that year. So the fact that Yidden didn't demand to bring the carbon Pesach throughout the other 39 years, you can say that they didn't think it's possible, because we never find clearly that demanding this would enable them to actually bring it. But on the other hand, though, when Moshe and Aaron wollten gebeten beim Eibischen, als sollen makriv sein dem Carbon Pesach, if Moshe and Aaron would demand this by the Eibishter, that they should bring the Carbon Pesach, und wollten das gepeilt, and they would have been successful. And then all Yidden would be able to bring the carbon. This itself would highlight the embarrassment of Yidden to a much greater extent. This would show very clearly that this is a carbon that one can demand and succeed in Hashem allowing you and commanding you to bring it. And nevertheless, the Yidden did not have that desire and that interest, and they didn't demand this. So this would highlight this embarrassing point about Yidden. So Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, being faithful shepherds, always looking out just for the good of Yidden. Not to highlight additionally the embarrassment of Yidden. So they are ready to forgo on a level of something that they could have had. They were not commanded to do this, but they could have came to this, to bring a carbon Pesach, to bring a carbon Pesach. Durch beten das, by demanding this, so they should have this opportunity, abi zu abbieten kvoiden shel Yisrael, as long as they will preserve the honor of Eden. That's more important for Moshe and Aaron than having the opportunity for themselves and for the whole Klal Yisrael for 39 years to bring the carbon Pesach. That's why Moshe and Aaron did not, on their own, demand this for Yidden. So now we can understand from this, more broadly, connecting this here in Sif Tes to the story of Pesach Sheni. Al pi kol anal, yishel vayir, al pi yena shel Torah shebepirish Rashi. We can understand this with the wine of Torah, the secrets of Torah that there is in Rashi. Das was their Inyan is, again, das was dem Inyan, as ein Seder, muktem and mocha b'Torah, learnt man up, lamadeta, from their parsha dafka. Why is it that this idea that what's written, we find that things in the Torah are written out of order, and even when the Torah gives dates, it still writes it out of order? We learn that, and the Torah does that, dafka over here regarding this story of Pesach Sheni. Why is that? The chiyuv from Pesach Sheni, because this is the chiddush from their parsha. The fact that you didn't have an obligation, if you can't bring the first carbon, to bring the Pesach Sheni, which is really the main novelty of this parsha. All the halachas of Pesach is already in Parshas Beit. Here, the main chiddush is the Pesach Sheni. Is in Yonai, what's the idea of this carbon? Nicht wie der Reifen Achiyah from Pesach Rishon. It's not similar to the way the obligation of the first Pesach is. Bechlal, under the mitzvahs, or in general, the obligation of all other mitzvahs. Was ist milchatchila ausgestellt geworden und darf sein al pi seder from Torah, bismane. Those mitzvahs are given with a certain seder and has to be brought in a certain time period. Nor das is an aneifung from shalei al pi seder. This is a mitzvah that comes out of the order. By divas haben nit makar gewend and Pesach bismane, and it's for those people that cannot bring the carbon in its right time. That's what the theme of this whole mitzvah of Pesach Sheni is all about, out of order. Und nach der Eifen, wie die Mitzvah ist gesagt geworden zu Yidden. Also the way the Yidden were commanded this mitzvah is given shalei al pi seder. It's also commanded to them, not in the regular order. Von anderen mitzvahs of the same order as all other mitzvahs was the Rabbi had say mitzvah given with chila, which the Rabbi just comes and gives Yidden from his initiative the mitzvah. Nor als Entfer zu die Tainu bakoshe von Yidden hat meim lenefesh adam lo menigara. It's as an answer to those Yidden that are impure, and they are demanding lo menigara, and the Eibishter gives them this opportunity. That's what Carbon Pesach represents, out of the ordinaries, both from the tzivui and also in the timing of when the mitzvah is fulfilled. In Avedas Hashem, so as this relates to every person's Aveda, what does this mean? Is das der Inyan von Avedas HaTshuva. This represents the Aveda of a Yid doing Tshuva, was is nit wie eine, was dient dem Eibischen b'derech hayasha, which is an individual that is not like someone that goes on the straight path and serves Hashem, Ashasa Salakim, Asa Alakim, that is, as a Adam Yashar. Hashem created every human being to go on a straight path. Rather, someone that stumbled and has sinned, has blemished, and has gone off the beaten path. That's what tshuva is about. But that's really what the Torah means when it says that there's a person that's impure, that it includes not just then in the time period that that were impure, but it means someone that's impure that he has to do tshuva. That's what the Pesach Sheni represents. It's for Yidden to give them an opportunity for tshuva. Das is the Remes in Rashi in them. So here, this is the hint and the point that Rashi is saying here. Nay, shehi gnusen shal Yisrael, shekol mem shana shal Yisrael b'midbar lo yikrivu ela Pesach zebel vad. That there's an embarrassing point over here that for 40 years Yidden only brought one Pesach. What does this mean? As euch di akrava b'meshach di ganzar boim shana had gedacht kommen and aneifen from shaloi al piseide. The very fact that they brought this carbon here one time the entire 40 years is not really what was supposed to be. This is an exception. Al derech wie der Eibishter hat sie angesagt makar seine carbon Pesach b'shana hashenis, but das is shaloi al piseide a mitzvah. This that the Eibishter says that they can bring the carbon this one time here, it's not the way the mitzvah was supposed to be. Wie bald ba midbar sind seine nitnes chayiv geworden. They were not obligated to bring a carbon Pesach in the midbar. But more importantly, as sie haben das gedarft mannen und betten beim Eibishter Kanal. But also this idea that this is something that Yidden have to demand from below. This is the whole idea of tshuva over here that Yidden have to demand. The time of them is, and the reason for this is, b'meshach the ala yaren shahoy Yisrael b'midbar. All these 40 years that Yidden were in the midbar is das gewena matzah von acha achet. Why were the Yidden in the midbar? It's because of the sin. Was the fast then is it given in midbar canal after the chet of the meraglim. That's why they were in the midbar. Nicht wie der matzah von Yidden by the akrave from carbon Pesach b'Mitzrayim. Unlike the time when Yidden brought the carbon Pesach when they were still in Mitzrayim, was sie sind damals gestanden in a matzah von erst geboren geworden. Then the Yidden was the birth of Klal Yisrael by Yitzias Mitzrayim. So then Yidden are tzaddikim. But here though in the midbar Yidden sinned. And Yidden are in a matzav that they sort of went off the beaten path. Ubemele hat sich damals beim Midbar gefordert bei Yidden an Avodah von ein Seder. L'mayla miseda. When Rashi says there's no order here in the place where this parsha is recorded, is because here at this time period, Yidden it was demanded of them that they should go out of the ordinary and demand that in one moment the Yid could do tshuva and they should have demanded to bring the carbon in the midbar as well. So that's the remez that Rashi is saying over here, the Genussen Shal Yisrael, that dafke here in this time period, when they're in the midbar, because of the sin, they should have demanded, and that's what tshuva is all about, to bring the carbon in this time period. So Sifir, the Rebbe concludes, what do we learn out from all this? Api, kolanal, kuntais. Based on all this, we can learn, as the parsha seino, lentmen dem goydle inye from their bakoshe lomenigora. The dafke here in this parsha, we learn how powerful the request and the demand of Loma Nigara, that we don't want to be left out, is. That if you hear, this is considered to be Gnusan Shal Yisrael, that if you didn't have an opportunity to do tshuva and to demand, they must, and it's expected of them to demand this. Since everything in Torah is eternal, an eternal lesson, is moving at us as negay b'chol hazmanim b'chol hamekaymis, so this is relevant for all time periods and in all places. Ubefrat and itztiken zman. Was definitely now in this time period, in the time in the end of Golus. Val derech zeh is muvam minegei bakoshes with tefillos from Bnei Yisrael b'chlal. So this is understood that this applies to all davening and requests that you didn't ask of the Eibishter in general. Val achas kama v'kama, especially and most definitely the bakoshe nafshis from kol echad v'echad mibnei Yisrael, the soulful request of every single Jew. As es soll sein, warum es doch kol kitzen, the gula mitzvah shleima oboif in the miyad heine golen, to demand, since all the times that Mashiach should have come have passed already, to demand that Mashiach should immediately come. Behaaloscha from Tfilas HaMidah, to use the language of davening that we say in Shmei Nesra every single day, 3 times a day. V'sidin zen mispal dreimal jeden tag von Yemei Sacha, that we say 3 times a day in a weekday. Es tzamach David avdocha meheira satzmiach, that Hashem should sprout forth the coming of David of Mashiach immediately. on dem chaysim von alle tefillas and the conclusion of all the tefillas that we daven in any day of the year, oich von Shabbos and Yontiv, including a Shabbos and Yontiv, yihiratzen chulu, sheyibane beis hamikdash b'mehera v'yameinu, that we conclude with this tefillah, that the Eibusha should bring Mashiach, kipshutai, may this be literally b'mehera v'yameinu mamish.